This is Orchid Winters, Cisco Sanz-Agero, Isaac Taylor, and Rowan Wheaton. Welcome to our podcast. Video games, as one of the only interactive mediums of art, and certainly the most far-reaching and impactful one, have a unique opportunity to portray mental health in a way that nothing else can. However, the vast majority of video games either choose to ignore this the vast majority of video games either choose to ignore this opportunity or to capitalize on it in a negative way. A study by Front Psychiatry reveals that 75% of video games from 2002 to 2021 that portray mental illness portray it in a violent, dehumanizing, or otherwise harmful light, i.e. a psychopathic character attempting to murder the protagonist, or a character with dissociative identity disorder switching to an evil identity and attacking the player. In our world today, both with the prevalence of mediums like video games and the sense of isolationism a lot of kids feel after COVID, being more open about mental health and how video games can help people through crisis and rough patches is really important. This podcast will explore 4 different games across 4 different genres, some popular, some less well-known, all addressing meaningful mental health topics. From Omori, a dark, twisted, story-driven game about finding ways to move through the darkness, to Undertale, where the subtleties of the characters convey deep and moving stories, or Celeste, about finding and learning how to value yourself despite your hardships, or to Spiritfarer, about learning how to move on after hardships. All of these games are not only fun to play, but they can tell us a lot about how to get through hard times by giving us a more approachable way to address issues throughout the game. To quote one of our interviews, it's like, if you could get through it in the game, it feels easier to do it in real life. This is why it's so important to speak about this today, so we can recognize how these games shape the way we interact with the world.
Omori perfectly shows how trauma and other mental illnesses can be portrayed through the medium of a video game, especially that which has an interactive story. This is Cisco, and I played Omori myself back in the early months of 2022, where it greatly shaped how I view mental illness and coping mechanisms for it. Please skip to the next part of the section if you'd prefer to avoid spoilers. The story of this game follows a young 15-year-old boy beginning 3 days before he moves out of his old town that he grew up in. It's the last chance for him to confront his trauma, which the player isn't aware of at that point. The name of the boy is Sunny, and you play him well in the real world, but in the dream world alternative, you play Omori, a version of Sunny which was when he was 12, before his traumatic event happened. As the name implies, Sunny is a hikikomori, which simply means a self-isolator. As the 3 days pass by, you can choose to go outside with your friends and learn of the story, or stay inside and refuse to confront your trauma, which leads to it only building up, ending with the main character committing suicide. However, if you choose to go outside, the player reunites with his friend group, and you're able to piece together the guilt that Sunny faced over his sister, Mari's accidental murder, which he then framed as suicide to avoid confrontation for. This guilt piled up for years, leading to a final standoff between the idea of holding back and repressing the memory and accepting the reality and sharing it with your friends. The previous of the 2 endings leads to Sunny committing suicide in the hospital after a fight with his best friend Basil, while the latter leads to him revealing the story to his friends Kel, Aubrey, and Hiro, who happens to be the boyfriend of his sister. The story of Omori really surprised me with how straightforward it was, as in its near outright refusal to use metaphors like other games, but instead showing how directly it affects Sunny. Also, it got me thinking about how I bottle up my emotions sometimes, and how bad things end up being for my mental health in the long run, creating an almost butterfly effect type situation. This led me to the question, why are interactive media and stories in which you can choose the plot able to convey messages of mental health so well? Interactive media is already very competent with its communication of messages, considering how involved it makes the player in the story, but Omori takes it a step further. In the dream world and real life, it lets you choose how you cope with the trauma and guilt of the major accident of the story, and in all the different endings you can see how they affect the player's mental health and stability in positive or negative ways. If you take the hikikomori route, You end up bottling up all the emotions you have without ever reaching a conclusion with your friends. Similarly, if you reach the bad ending by deciding to hide the truth in the main route of the game, it shows that trauma welling up inside of you with no way to drain only builds up a similar self-hatred that ends up leading to suicide for Sunny. Finally, only in the good ending, in which you confess your actions to your friends, do you truly learn to come to terms with yourself. Being able to see the cause and effect of each action you take as the player character makes you much more aware of what in specific makes a healthy and unhealthy coping mechanism, which is amazing for communication with the player. The coping mechanisms and examples of what can happen if you badly cope with trauma and other mental illnesses in Omori serves as a warning to those in real life who push away others and bottle their guilt up within them. People who are suffering from real-life trauma and guilt, such as that in Omori, be it more or less extreme, can take these lessons from how Sunny succeeds and fails to cope in the game and apply it to their own life. It also helps those who know people affected by trauma to be more understanding and care for them, with a greater knowledge base of how badly it can mess someone up in the head. Overall, Omori has a perfect portrayal of trauma, and perfectly shows how to cope with it as well.
Many characters in the game Undertale by Toby Fox show signs of mental health issues that are shown through their subtle characteristics. Some issues that are brought up are depression, suicidal thoughts, as well as struggling with loss. The story of Undertale can show signs of growth as a person through their characters and the player, depending on what choices you make. Undertale is not a game that directly confronts the player about mental health issues shown throughout the game, but rather subtly displays them for the player to notice. If you play through the game with the intention to only beat the game, you may not notice anything special or off about any of the characters. However, if you take time to interact with them and learn more about them, you will notice very clear signs of mental health issues within some of them. An example of this could be seen with one of the more popular characters in the series, that being Sanz. Sanz shows signs of depression that, depending on your interactions with him and noticing how he acts, could either be obvious or very difficult to notice. We can see that Sanz suffers from insomnia, which is one very common symptom of depression. We can also see, directly from dialogue from Sanz, that he appears to be extremely unmotivated, as well as partakes in excessive overeating. Both of those are symptoms of depression. Depression would also make sense with Sanz's character. We don't know much about where Sanz came from, and neither do the characters. However, we do know that the only family he has left is his brother, and the only other person he is known to be related to was ripped apart in space and time because of one of his experiments. We also know that Sanz has attempted to bring him back using a machine in the back of his house. Unfortunately for him though, the machine is broken and Sanz has now given up. We see in the dialogue during his fight that he finds no meaning in even trying anymore, and he has just given up. Based on the evidence shown in this game, it is reasonable to say that Sanz has a form of depression. Another character that shows many mental health issues is Asgore. Asgore is a character that struggles with loss and is still forced to persevere. Asgore is a king who has struggled through the loss of his wife, son, and friends. Throughout the whole game, Asgore is a character who is described to be an extremely terrifying threat and a cold-blooded killer. However, when you finally meet him, he appears to be a broken character who is being forced to kill people that he does not want to. We can see that Asgore himself does not want to hurt others, as during his fight with him, he is clearly hurt by fighting you. Asgore holds back in his fight as he is still trying to find a way out of killing another person. He also shows signs of depression and suicidal thoughts as well as tendencies. If you beat Asgore in your fight with him and decide to kill him, he will smile, and even if you choose to spare him, he will kill himself. A large reason for this could be that he does not want to fight anymore and could not take the pain of being forced to fight, even though he lost his loved ones in the same way. Perhaps the most obvious case of depression is Napstablook, and unlike the other characters here, you as the player can actually help him stop feeling as depressed as he normally is. Napstablook's depression can derive from self-hatred due to all of his loved ones leaving him. Napstablook believes that his family and friends leaving him is caused by himself, which leads to depression shown in his character. You can help him get over this by becoming his friend and helping him make other friends. When you first meet Napstablook, he is very obviously depressed, lonely, and secluded from others. After talking to Napstablook in his fight, he says he's glad to have made a friend, and he leaves. You can then go to his house later in the game and talk to him more. You can listen to music with him, and he can even teach you how to race with snails. In the epilogue of the game, we learn that Napstablook becomes friends with other characters in the game, and even composes music with some of them. Not only do many characters in the game show signs of depression and suicidal tendencies, but so do you as the player. You play as a character named Frisk, who in the prologue of the game climbs a mountain for an unknown reason. However, during dialogue at the end of the game, it is heavily implied that you climbed the mountain in an attempt of suicide. However, you failed the suicide attempt and started the game. The characters show mental health issues tackled in the game, but also the story itself can be seen as an allegory to getting past depression. Throughout the game, we could see the character Flowey following us, while normally going unnoticed until the end of the game when you must fight him. Flowey can be seen as a form of depression and loss that won't leave until you battle it. You fight Flowey at the end of the game after he kills Asgore. This can be representative of finally tackling your depression after a loss. The new home scene near the end of the game can also show what it is like to be in the mind of someone becoming depressed. The last part of the new home scene seems happy, but it has an eerie undertone to it. The sudden shift from the sadness of Asgore's loss of his child immediately to the happy ideas of being free are similar to how people who decide to commit suicide act. Commonly, when someone decides to choose to kill themselves, they will be at their happiest days before they attempt to kill themselves out of relief. The final line of this scene is, "You're going to be free." This line shows the last part of a depressive state of a person after they have finally decided to kill themselves. However, the game does not end there, and the true ending of Undertale, in which you interact with every monster to learn about them, do not kill a single monster, and do a few extra things to help out, you will unlock the true pacifist ending. In this ending, you will fight the final boss of the game. Throughout that fight, you overcome different parts of depression during the different phases of the boss. During the fight, you use your hopes and determination to help you fight against a character that has been representative of depression since the very start. In the second part of the fight, you are given an unwinnable scenario where you can only struggle. This can be seen as a stage in depression in which you are struggling to get rid of it, yet you make zero progress. In the final phase of the fight, you talk to the other characters that you met in your playthrough, and you eventually talk to who you are fighting. This can be an example of coming to terms with depression and figuring out what is causing it. At the end of the fight, you are able to overcome your depression, and while there is no cure for it, you can learn to live with it and manage it. This is similar to what happens in the game. When you finally defeat the final boss, after a long struggle and finally get past your depression, the true pacifist ending is the happiest ending for everyone. You are able to accomplish the main goal of the game, that being to free the monsters from the underground, and everyone is able to live their lives and get over their mental issues. This could be seen as the best ending for the player as well, as it is one where you are able to truly get over your depression and your suicidal thoughts by metaphorically suppressing it and managing it at the end of the game. After the character's failed attempt at suicide, it starts off the journey that can be interpreted as an allegory for overcoming depression. This is symbolic in a way that many people who attempt suicide and fail are less likely to attempt it again and rather try to get over what caused them to attempt in the first place. The story starts off with an attempted suicide and ends with the character you play as metaphorically overcoming depression and helping others along their way to achieve the happiest possible result for everyone.
This is Orchid Winters. For years, I've been highly interested in how video games and other interactive mediums can portray mental health in unique ways. And one of the video games that I feel best portrays this concept is Celeste, a video game made by Extremely OK Studios in 2018. Ever since my friend Frederick Sommerfeld introduced me to Celeste, I have been hooked. I have played it over and over again and tried to collect every possible token and beat every possible screen. It boasts an incredible art style, a beautiful soundtrack by Lena Raine, and great gameplay as well as a great story. The protagonist of Celeste is named Madeline, which is also the name of a delicious cookie. Throughout the game, she climbs Celeste Mountain, which represents her anxiety. The game is extremely difficult, which represents the struggle of overcoming anxiety very well. Frederick, who I spoke to about Celeste, mental health, and video games as a whole, says that he actually feels that the difficulty of the game can hinder the message that it is trying to represent. He says that, for a beginner, the gameplay can be so difficult that it distracts from the overall message.
Spiritfarer is a fun, engaging game that tackles themes of letting go and understanding yourself with a cast of kind characters. On its face, it may seem like a resource management game. You're trying to build your ship and ferry the characters you meet to essentially the afterlife. But you get to know these characters, establish some kind of parasocial connection. These characters shape your story and the young girl you play in her search for identity. The character finds herself in the interactions with these NPCs, though in the end, you have to let them go. But each time you see a character off into essentially the afterlife, you find another soul to guide, to help, to learn from. It shows the cyclic nature of challenge and grief, the ups and downs that comes with life, and the power of letting go.
We would like to thank the following sources for our podcast: Omori by Omocat, Undertale by Toby Fox, Spiritfarer by Thunder Lotus Games, Celeste by Extremely OK Games, Omori, Trauma Depiction Through Video Games by Kevin Tien, The Game with a Perfect Portrayal of Trauma by Clark Ellison on YouTube, Wikipedia, How Spiritfarer Helped Me Through the Pandemic by Palamed, Reflections on Death, Coping Through Spiritfarer by Sanjana Padala, Frederick Sommerfield, Mountains of Mindfulness, Celeste, and the Mental Health of Interactive Media by Paul Boardman, Depictions of Mental Illness and Psychiatry in Popular Video Games over the Last 20 Years by the NIH, and the Omori OST for the music used throughout the podcast. Thank you for listening.